My son sold my apartment, worth several $1 million, without telling me. Then he handed me $100 and said, "Go rent a room in some slum on the outskirts of the city." I laughed. He had no idea what I had already done days earlier. Before we get into the story, don't forget to say hi in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. And make sure to hit the subscribe button on Stories with Meaning so you won't miss our next powerful story. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. For nearly half a century, I lived in an old Art Deco apartment in Upper East Manhattan, New York City. The building dated back to the early 1900s. Thick walls, wooden-framed windows with fading white paint, high ceilings adorned with classic crown molding. The floors were made of solid teak wood, releasing a soft, earthy scent whenever it rained. From the balcony, I could see the tall trees of Central Park and still hear birds clinging to life amid the constant roar of the city. This place wasn't just a home, it was part of my life, a witness to every laugh, every tear, every story that ever mattered. In 1982, my late husband, Robert Whitmore, and I bought this apartment for $70,000. Even then, it felt like a fortune. We drained our savings and borrowed from relatives just to secure our dream home. Today, people say the apartment is worth over $3 million. To most, it's a tempting asset. To me, it's a fortress, the only place where I ever truly felt safe. This is where I raised my son, Daniel Whitmore, our only child. Daniel is now 42. He lives in Newark, New Jersey with his wife Vanessa Clark and their twin daughters, Emily and Sophie, both 15. Daniel works at a private investment firm. His salary is decent, but his wife's tastes are endless. Vanessa is the kind of woman who measures love by the size of diamonds and the brand stitched into a dress. I was never close to her. There was always something behind her smile that made me cautious, a smile that never reached her eyes. Over the past few years, their marriage hadn't cracked because of loud fights, but because of mounting financial pressure. About 5 years ago, Daniel began borrowing money from me. At first, it was $300 here, $200 there, always with reasonable excuses: car repairs, tutoring fees, work-related expenses. I gave it without hesitation because I was his mother. That was my weakness. The borrowing became a habit. The amounts grew larger. The requests came more often. Last year alone, I had given them nearly $30,000. Daniel always promised to pay me back. There was always a bonus coming, a deal almost closed. None of it ever happened. Every time I sent money, Vanessa followed up with long text messages. "Mom Eleanor, you're truly an angel to our family. We're so lucky to have you." Over time, those words felt hollow, like thanking a bank teller after withdrawing cash. I realized I was no longer a mother to them. I was an ATM that still breathed. The apartment soon became a sensitive topic during family visits. Daniel would casually remark, "This place is really big for you alone, Mom. Maintenance fees must be expensive." Vanessa would nod and add, "You could move somewhere more practical, maybe New Jersey or even upstate New York. The air is cleaner." They always wrapped their suggestions in concern, but I knew the truth. In their eyes, I was an aging widow with a multi-million-dollar asset just waiting to die. I was still healthy. My mind was sharp. I had no intention of leaving. I told myself, I will stay here until they carry me in a body bag. But last winter, something changed. The pressure intensified. Vanessa started visiting more often, always coincidentally after being in the city. She brought chicken soup or homemade pastries, claiming she worried I wasn't eating well. While talking, she would wander around the apartment. Her eyes scanned cabinets, antiques, bookshelves. "Such a shame," she once said, touching a porcelain plate inherited from my grandmother. These things would be worth a fortune if sold. The girl's education would be secured. She spoke as if discussing a future without me in it. Daniel began expressing concern for my safety. He said I was too old to live alone, that the stairs were dangerous, that plumbing and electrical matters were too complicated. He suggested I give him full control over my finances. Just in case something happens, Mom. I smiled politely, fully aware that the only person who had ever drained my savings was my own son. 3 months ago, Vanessa began leaving brochures around my living room. Senior living facilities, small apartments in surrounding states. She highlighted pages with fitness rooms and rose gardens, speaking as if it was all for my well-being. I knew better. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Daniel called, his voice frantic. Vanessa's mother needed expensive treatment at a private hospital. His firm was laying people off. Emily and Sophie needed prep courses for elite high schools. He needed $40,000 immediately. When I hesitated, his tone changed. He accused me of being selfish, of hoarding money while his family struggled. He said I was trapped in the past, clinging to a massive apartment while they fought to survive. What hurt wasn't the amount. It was the entitlement in his voice, as if everything I owned already belonged to him. I gave him the money. After the call ended, I sat alone in my living room for hours. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was clear, crystal clear. In his eyes, I was no longer his mother. I was a resource to be managed and eventually depleted. And that night, without telling anyone, I made a decision. If they wanted to erase me from my own life, I would make sure they regretted it. But when I glanced at the photos still open on her phone screen, something felt wrong. The angles were too clean, too deliberate, focused not on memories, but on furniture, layouts, and spatial flow, like professional real estate listing photos. That night, I couldn't sleep. As rain tapped steadily against my windows, I replayed everything in my mind. The increasingly frequent visits, the calculating looks at my belongings, the questions about wills and ownership transfers. All of it pointed to one chilling conclusion. They were planning to take this apartment away from me. The next morning, I called an old friend, Margaret Hale, who now worked at a law firm in Boston. I told her everything. She was silent for a moment before speaking. "If your suspicions are correct," she said carefully, "they could use legal channels to force control, especially if they claim you're no longer capable of managing yourself." Her words pierced me like needles. Margaret then introduced me to someone she said I could trust, a private investigator named Rachel Pierce, in her early 50s. Her eyes were sharp, her gaze steady, the kind that couldn't be easily fooled. We met at a small coffee shop near Union Square, New York. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said calmly but firmly, "If they truly have bad intentions, we need evidence, not assumptions." Rachel explained that she could install discrete audio recorders and miniature cameras in several areas of my apartment. They would capture conversations and actions when I wasn't in the room, or even when I was present but pretending not to hear. I hesitated. Spying on my own family felt wrong. But when I remembered the way Vanessa had looked at my family heirlooms, my doubt vanished. I agreed. The installation happened 2 days later. Rachel arrived with a large equipment bag and worked quickly. Button-sized cameras were hidden in the bookshelf, a living room corner, and even inside a rarely touched wall decoration. Audio recorders were placed beneath the dining table and in the family room. Everything fed into a secure storage device only Rachel could access. We didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Daniel called and invited me to dinner at the apartment. He said he wanted to bring Vanessa and the girls. I agreed, knowing it was the perfect chance to watch them closely. That evening, I cooked Daniel's favorite dishes: braised beef with potatoes, liver stir-fry, a simple vegetable soup. Emily and Sophie were cheerful, chatting about school, friends, and an upcoming theater performance. But amid the laughter, I noticed Daniel pacing, quietly photographing rooms, checking corners, pretending to admire the old furniture. Vanessa, meanwhile, asked about my daily routines. Did I ever forget to turn off the stove? Did I struggle to remember my medications? The questions sounded casual, but each word felt like a pin pressing into my awareness. They were building a narrative, one where I appeared confused, fragile, incapable. After they left, Rachel came over that same night to retrieve the recordings. We sat at the dining table and replayed what had been captured. That was when I heard Vanessa's voice, low and deliberate. If we move fast with the power of attorney and sell this place, we could get over $1.2 million. I've checked the listings. Units here are in high demand. Then Daniel replied, "Not yet. We need guardianship first. Once we have a medical statement saying she's mentally unfit, we can take over everything." Something inside me cracked. Not sadness, not disappointment, something colder. At that moment, I understood. I wasn't facing my son and daughter-in-law anymore. I was facing two people who saw me as an obstacle, and I decided that if they wanted to play dirty, I would respond in a way they would never expect. From that night on, my view of Daniel and Vanessa changed completely. Every smile felt like a mask, every sweet word a thin layer covering raw greed. I watched Daniel's hands when he touched the table, Vanessa's eyes as they swept the room, silently pricing each item. A few days later, they became bolder. Vanessa arrived unannounced with a bowl of oxtail soup. "Eat well, Mom. You don't want to get sick." But as soon as she stepped inside, she circled the living room. She pointed at a small crack in the ceiling near the balcony. "This looks dangerous. You live alone. What if it collapses?" She took photos. Then she went into the guest room and opened the wardrobe. Seeing stacks of batik fabrics inherited from my mother, she smiled crookedly. "Such a shame to let these sit here. These could sell for a lot." A few days later, it was Daniel's turn. He brought a folder filled with documents. "These are just emergency forms, power of attorney to make things easier if something happens." I pretended to be confused. "Why would I need this? Everything's already in order." Daniel sighed like a parent dealing with a stubborn child. "You don't understand. Seniors get scammed all the time. If I handle things, everything stays safe." He placed a pen in front of me. I glanced at the document, full authority over assets and finances. My hands trembled on purpose. "Daniel, I need to read this slowly. My eyes are blurry. I can't find my glasses." He smiled thinly, irritation flashing in his eyes. He knew I was stalling. Rachel later advised me, "Keep playing the role of the easily guided old woman. Let them feel superior. Arrogance makes people careless." Weeks later, more recordings came in. Daniel's voice said, "Dr. Richard Collins is ready any time. One evaluation and we'll get a statement declaring her incompetent. He owes me a favor from the golf club." Vanessa replied, "Once we have that, we file for guardianship. After it's approved, we sell the apartment. I've already looked at a house in Westchester County. Big yard, perfect for us." They even discussed how to explain my sudden disappearance to Emily and Sophie. Vanessa laughed softly. "Just say Grandma is sick and needs special care. Kids forget eventually." That was the moment my heart fully hardened. Soon enough, their plan went into motion. Dr. Collins began calling my landline, claiming he was conducting senior health evaluations in Manhattan. He asked me to schedule an appointment. I declined politely. 2 days later, he called again, more forceful. Refusing evaluations like this can sometimes be interpreted as diminished decision-making capacity. I thanked him and hung up. Meanwhile, Vanessa's visits intensified. She pointed out a dripping faucet. "If you can't handle small things like this, it shows you're struggling." She gestured to a pot I'd briefly left on the stove while answering the phone. What if the fire had spread? Every sentence wrapped in nauseating concern, carefully crafted to paint me as incapable. Daniel brought more paperwork, spread it across the dining table like a teacher explaining homework. Emergency contacts, healthcare proxy, financial management transfer. "Just sign, Mom. It's all for your own good." I shook my head gently. "I need time to think. My eyes hurt." His hand clenched on the table. "Stop making this difficult. We're trying to help you." I smiled faintly, hiding the satisfaction growing inside me, because I knew every ounce of pressure they applied was tightening the noose around their own necks. Recording after recording that Rachel Pierce collected formed a complete picture. Their plan, their steps, even the estimated date they intended to move me into a senior care facility. In one recording, Vanessa's voice was clear. "She has to be placed somewhere far from her friends and relatives, some quiet suburb. That way no one keeps showing up asking questions." That night, after Rachel played all the evidence, I sat silently. No tears, no pity left. Only a decision, solid and unshakable. They wanted to steal my life, so I would make sure they paid dearly for it. Very dearly. I knew that to face Daniel and Vanessa, I couldn't act emotionally. I had to play the way they did, quietly, strategically, using their own weaknesses against them. And their greatest weakness was greed, so strong it blinded their common sense. Rachel already had a plan. "The evidence we have is more than enough to corner them," she said. "But we don't strike yet. We let them feel like they're winning first. Let them sink deeper, so when the time came, they couldn't escape." I began playing a new role, an old woman tired of resisting, slowly giving in to pressure from her son and daughter-in-law. Whenever they visited, I no longer rejected their ideas outright. I nodded when Vanessa talked about how comfortable senior living facilities were. I listened as Daniel explained the benefits of him managing all my assets. Sometimes I pretended to forget conversations we just had and asked him to repeat himself. All of it to convince them I was weakening. One evening, I invited them over for dinner. I set the table neatly and cooked Daniel's favorite dishes, chicken curry and a spicy shrimp paste sauce he used to praise years ago. Vanessa arrived wearing her sweetest smile, complimenting the aroma. Emily and Sophie came too, and for a moment it felt like a normal family. But beneath the light conversation, Daniel was once again photographing corners of the apartment. Vanessa pulled me aside into the kitchen. "We found a buyer," she said casually, stirring soup in the pot. "It's above market, enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life." I nodded slowly, pretending to be moved. "If that's truly what's best," I said softly. Vanessa's face lit up instantly. A few days later, Daniel returned again, this time with a man named Frank Williams, introduced as a real estate agent specializing in inherited properties. He was well-dressed, friendly, but his eyes were calculating. I sat quietly as Daniel explained that I was ready to move. That her condition has declined, he added. "We want this done quickly, before she changes her mind." As if I weren't even there. Frank nodded, praising the apartment's prime location. He said there was already a highly interested buyer, a company called North Atlantic Property Holdings, willing to pay cash and close fast. The price? Over $1.2 million. Daniel and Vanessa didn't ask why anyone would pay above market value. They simply exchanged looks and smiled. A smile that felt like a rusty nail driven straight through my chest. What they didn't know was this. Rachel had arranged everything. Working with a former federal investigator, Lucas Harding, she had set up a fully documented shell company. Rented office, legitimate paperwork, temporary staff briefed that they were assisting in an investigation. The man playing the buyer, Robert Lane, was a professional actor skilled at portraying a successful businessman. Day by day, Daniel and Vanessa grew more excited. They talked openly about the large house they planned to buy in Westchester County, a new car paid in full, a long vacation once my situation was settled. They never realized every word was being recorded. One afternoon, Daniel arrived again with another stack of documents. This time, he was impatient. "Mom, we need you to sign this power of attorney now. The buyer wants everything handled through me so it can move fast." I pretended to be confused. "Which one is this again? Didn't we already sign something?" He snapped. "This is different. This one's for the sale." Vanessa chimed in gently. "You forget things so easily. That's why Daniel should handle it. You'll just get stressed." They pressured me for over an hour. Vanessa kept touching my hand. Daniel kept repeating that it was all for my own good. Finally, I pretended to give in. I signed the document right in front of them. Daniel smiled in satisfaction, hugged me briefly, and slipped the papers into his folder. What they didn't know, a week earlier, I had already transferred ownership of the apartment into an irrevocable legal trust with my longtime attorney, Margaret Hale, appointed as trustee. That power of attorney they were so proud of, worthless. But the signature I placed that night, combined with the clear recordings of coercion, became proof that they had forced someone they themselves claimed was legally incompetent to sign critical documents, a serious offense. After they left that night, I sat alone in the dark living room. Cool night air drifted through the window, carrying the distant sound of traffic below. I closed my eyes, replaying every step of the plan Rachel and I had built together. They thought they had won. In reality, they had tightened the noose around their own necks. The days after I signed the document were strangely entertaining. I watched Daniel and Vanessa sink deeper into fantasies of luxury, like people holding what they believed were the keys to heaven. In truth, they were standing at the edge of a cliff they had dug themselves. Daniel quit his job, claiming he wanted to focus on caring for his aging mother. I knew the truth. He believed the sale money would make work unnecessary. Vanessa began touring upscale neighborhoods in Westchester County and Long Island, paying deposits on a large house. She ordered imported leather sofas, crystal chandeliers, and marble kitchen cabinets, all on borrowed money, because they were certain the apartment sale would close any day. They even enrolled Emily and Sophie in an elite private school in southern Manhattan, paying an admission fee nearly equal to the price of a new car. Emily told me excitedly, believing it was a reward for her parents' hard work. I smiled faintly, feeling a strange ache in my chest. Not for Daniel or Vanessa, but for my grandchildren who would one day learn a painful truth. At home, Vanessa grew busy making lists of items she planned to take. "We'll bring the Persian rug from the living room. You won't need the glass cabinet either," she said, writing briskly. Daniel agreed, discussing in front of me which items to sell and which to discard. They spoke as if I was already gone, as if I were nothing more than a name on a document waiting to be crossed out. One day, Rachel informed me that they had hired a moving company. The date was set. 1 week after the supposed sale closing, all my belongings would be removed. Rachel had already contacted the movers, introducing herself as my legal representative, and warned them that removing anything without my written consent would constitute theft. I smiled to myself. Everything was in place. They believed the ending was near. They had no idea the story was only just beginning. The moving company agreed to cooperate. They would record everything if Daniel tried to force the process. Meanwhile, the buyer, played flawlessly by Robert Lane, continued his role. He visited the apartment twice more, praising the layout, asking detailed questions about building management rules, and always arriving with his attorney to make everything look legitimate. Frank Williams, the real estate agent, grew increasingly enthusiastic. He began calculating his commission out loud, even telling Daniel about plans to buy a new car once the deal closed. In one recording, Daniel could be heard laughing with Frank and Vanessa, talking about how easy it was to handle an elderly parent deemed senile. "Once you have power of attorney, everything can be arranged," Daniel chuckled. "She won't even realize what's happening." Vanessa added casually, "The key is to move her to a senior facility quickly. No interference there." The words made my blood run cold, but they also hardened my resolve. Advised that we let their plan continue all the way to the final stage so the legal trap would be airtight. "The more steps they take," she said with a faint smile, "the harder it will be for them to deny anything later. Let them get busy building the future they think is coming. The more confident they become, the harder the fall." Day by day, I continued playing the obedient old woman. Vanessa took me to tour several senior living facilities in New Jersey and upstate New York, showing me small gardens and reading rooms. I nodded, occasionally complaining about how exhausting it was to manage such a large apartment alone. I even gazed around the facilities with what she assumed was careful consideration, while inside I was counting down the days until every mask they wore would collapse. Daniel grew bolder. He began telling Emily and Sophie that Grandma would soon live somewhere safer and more comfortable. Once, smiling broadly, he said, "When Grandma's apartment sells, we can take a vacation to Hawaii or even overseas." The girls cheered, unaware that their happiness was built on a plan to betray their own blood. I slept soundly every night, not because I felt safe, but because I knew every step they took was recorded, every word preserved as evidence, and every move they made was bringing them closer to ruin. And I, behind my fragile role, would be both witness and architect of their downfall. That day, the air in New York City was hot and oppressive, even with the air conditioning running since morning. I sat in my rattan chair by the window, watching the congested streets below. Daniel arrived with hurried steps, his face glowing with excitement. A thick brown folder was clutched in his hand. Vanessa followed close behind, carrying her oversized bag stuffed with papers and notes. "Mom," Daniel said, sitting down without preamble, "everything's done. The buyer is just waiting for signatures at the notary's office. If we agree, the transaction closes next week. The money transfers, and you move straight into the place we picked." I stared at him for a long moment, as if processing his words. "Next week?" I asked softly. Vanessa nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mom, everything's arranged. Even the senior residence is ready. Corner room, large windows, lots of trees outside. You'll love it." I smiled faintly, while inside I imagined their faces when they realized this was all a trap. "If that's the case, all right," I said quietly. Relief washed over Vanessa's face. They began discussing logistics, moving schedules, transportation to the facility, and who would manage the apartment once the buyer officially owned it. I listened silently, occasionally nodding, occasionally sighing. Every meeting was recorded. Rachel had placed a tiny device in the corner of my bookshelf. Even their hushed conversations were captured clearly. Every discussion about relocating me, selling my belongings, and managing the sales proceeds would become indisputable evidence. A few days later, Daniel invited me to meet at Frank Williams's office. They wanted me to review the sale documents. The office was located in a 3-story commercial building in Brooklyn, its cream-colored paint faded with age. Frank greeted me with a polished, insincere smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's a pleasure to see you again. Everything's ready, just signatures here." I sat down slowly, opening the documents one by one. Of course, everything had been prepared by Rachel. The paperwork looked official, but each clause contained a trap that would ultimately rebound against Daniel and Vanessa. They didn't realize the documents were only copies with no legal force, yet more than sufficient to prove they were coercing me into signing away all my rights. In the room, Robert Lane appeared as the buyer, dressed neatly, briefcase in hand. "I'm eager to move in," he said politely. "The location is perfect for my family." Daniel grew visibly impatient, tapping the small table beside him. When everything had been read, I looked at Daniel. "If this truly benefits everyone, I'll sign." Vanessa immediately slid the pen toward me. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from holding back laughter. I signed where they pointed. Daniel exhaled in relief. Vanessa smiled in satisfaction. Frank gave a small clap. They drove me home afterward. On the way, Daniel talked excitedly about a new car. Vanessa spoke of a small celebration for their new beginning. I sat in the back seat, watching traffic crawl past, imagining the moment when all their plans would collapse in an instant. That night, Rachel came to my apartment. She brought the original legal documents we had secured long before the meeting. "They're at the final stage now," she said calmly. "Once the sale funds fail to arrive and we submit the evidence, every door will close on them." I looked at her and nodded. For the first time since all of this began, I felt truly calm, because I knew the next step would end every betrayal. That morning, the sun was already high when I woke. The air felt heavy, like a warning that something significant was about to happen. From behind the curtains, I watched the street grow busy. Horns blared, vendors shouted. I sat in my rattan chair, sipping warm tea, steadying my heart, though my chest still pounded. Today was the day they had been waiting for, and the day everything would end. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel arrived, neatly dressed, hair slicked back, confidence radiating from him. Vanessa followed, wearing a deep red dress and carrying her large folder. "Mom, are you ready?" she asked sweetly. I nodded slowly. "Yes." They took me to the notary's office Frank had arranged, a second-floor suite in an office building in Midtown Manhattan. From the outside, everything looked official: a gold-lettered sign, a polite receptionist. I walked slowly, playing the part of a tired old woman. Behind me, Rachel and Lucas Harding watched from a distance, disguised as other clients, waiting for their turn. Inside the conference room, Robert Lane sat neatly, smiling. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he greeted politely. Frank stood beside him with a stack of documents. Daniel put a hand on my shoulder, guiding me into a chair. Vanessa sat close, watching every movement. "Mom," she whispered, "this is just a formality." And that was when the final act began. "Everything has been arranged," Daniel Whitmore said, pointing to the final page of the documents. I pretended to read, nodded slowly, then looked at the buyer. "If this is all correct, then let's proceed," I said in a hoarse voice. The pen was placed into my hand. I signed in front of them, one page after another, each sheet they believed would change their lives forever. Daniel smiled broadly. Vanessa Clark held my hand briefly, as if offering gratitude. The real estate agent, Frank Wilson, even whispered, "You won't regret this, ma'am. Once everything is finalized, the funds will be transferred to your account within 3 business days. Daniel tapped the small table impatiently. "So that means we're finally safe?" His eyes sparkled like a child waiting for a gift. We left the office just before noon. During the drive back, Daniel and Vanessa excitedly discussed what they would do once the money arrived. Daniel talked about a house he had already set his sights on in Boca Raton, Florida. Vanessa began calculating renovation costs. I listened in silence, gazing out the window at New York City, pulsing with its relentless energy. When we arrived back at the apartment, Daniel informed me that they would start packing my belongings the next day. "So once the money arrives, we can move you immediately," he said. I nodded with a faint smile. "All right." That night, Rachel Pierce, the private investigator, came again. She carried a thick folder containing photographs and recorded transcripts from the entire process that day. "Everything is complete," she said, sitting on the couch. Luke Miller, who accompanied her, added, "Once they realize the money never arrives, we hand everything over." I stared at the folder for a long moment. Inside were not just papers and photos, but the end of every fear I had carried for months. Outside the window, the city lights flickered as if bearing witness. Tomorrow, the door that had long been open to betrayal would finally slam shut forever. 3 days after the meeting at the notary's office, the air in my apartment felt different. A tension lingered in every corner, as though the walls themselves sensed what was coming. That morning, Daniel arrived without his usual confidence. Vanessa followed behind him, phone clutched tightly in her hand, her smile gone. "There's a problem," Daniel said bluntly, dropping into the chair and slamming his folder onto the table. "Frank says the buyer's money hasn't reached the account yet, some technical issue, he claims, even though all the documents were signed." I looked at him with feigned surprise. How could that happen? Wasn't everything settled? Vanessa sighed heavily and sat beside him. "That's the thing, Eleanor. The buyer asked for more time. Frank insists it'll be done next week." The following week came, and the same excuses followed. "Still processing. Additional documents are needed. The notary is handling extra legalization." One excuse after another flowed from Frank's mouth, relayed to me by Daniel with growing frustration. Vanessa grew increasingly restless, especially because the down payment on the Boca Raton house, nearly $120,000, had already been paid, and the seller was demanding full payment. Meanwhile, I continued my days as usual. Morning tea, watering plants on the balcony, watching the news in the evening. Every night, Rachel came with updates. "They're starting to suspect each other," she said one night. "Daniel is pressuring Frank. Vanessa is questioning whether the buyer was ever real." I smiled softly. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The longer they waited for the money that would never exist, the deeper their panic grew. And once that panic peaked, the trap would snap shut. A few days later, Daniel came alone. His face was pale, eyes red-shot from lack of sleep. "Mom, I don't understand anymore," he said quietly. "Frank won't answer. The buyer vanished. The notary says there's nothing he can do without the buyer present." He swallowed hard. "Vanessa's furious. She's blaming me." I studied him carefully. "Daniel, perhaps this was never meant to be yours." I paused, forcing him to meet my eyes. "From the beginning, the path was wrong, and when the path is wrong, goodness never follows." He looked away, jaw tightening. The arrogance he once carried was now colliding with fear. That evening, my phone vibrated. A message from Rachel appeared. "They'll break tonight. Tomorrow we move." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. The waiting was almost over. The next morning felt unusually calm. Rain from the night before left the air cool and clean. I sat with a cup of hot tea when the doorbell rang. Rachel entered with two plainclothes detectives from the New York State Attorney General's office. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said firmly, "it's time." Moments later, Daniel and Vanessa burst in. Daniel looked disheveled. Vanessa's face was hollow, as if she'd been crying all night. "Mom, Frank is gone," Daniel shouted. "His office is empty. His number is disconnected." I said nothing. Rachel stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Clark, Eleanor Whitmore has formally reported all of your actions: forgery, abuse of power of attorney, and attempted unlawful relocation to senior care facility without consent." Daniel froze. Vanessa glared at Rachel, trembling. "What is this supposed to mean?" One of the detectives produced official documents. "We have full evidence, audio recordings, photographs, and documentation of coercion." Daniel's hands shook. "Mom, you planned all of this?" I met his gaze, holding back years of pain. "Daniel, you are my son, but blood is not a license to betray the woman who gave you life. You dug this grave yourself." Vanessa tried to protest, but Rachel cut her off coldly. "You scheduled senior care placement, hired movers, and attempted to liquidate assets without legal authority. Every step was documented." The detectives escorted them out. Daniel didn't resist. Vanessa's voice faded beneath the sound of footsteps. When the door closed, silence filled the apartment. "It's over," Rachel said gently. Relief washed over me. Not victory, but peace. Days later, my accounts were fully secured, all assets restored under my name alone. "You're free now," Rachel said, handing me the final legal confirmation. That night, I sat alone beneath the warm glow of the lamp. An old photograph rested on the table. My late husband, Robert Whitmore, Daniel as a child, and me. I looked at it for a long time, then placed it back in the drawer. Outside, New York remained loud and restless, but inside my heart, for the first time in years, there was real silence. No more betrayal, no more threats hidden behind smiles. Only my home, my freedom, and peace. Finally, mine.